Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Samurai Goddess. The goddess next door takes on kung fu killers in this action-packed martial arts Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Samurai Goddess in paperback and e-readers today. In a previous video, I discussed the big two, Marvel Comics and DC Comics, and rock bottom. And while I don't want to see a lot of people lose their jobs as a result of a collapse of the comic book industry, I'm beginning to believe that a complete collapse of this comic book industry might be the best thing to ever happen to the publishing divisions of Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and many of these indies out here. Because with a complete collapse of the comic book industry, we will pull away all the enablers who continue to maintain all the dysfunction in the comic book industry, and then we can get towards facilitating some serious and real change in the comic book industry that enables all the readers who are sitting on the sidelines to have the incentive to come back to the medium. When I look at the comic book industry from the big picture, I see a whole lot of readers who are out here waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the quality of the product to improve. And the reason why they're holding their money is because they look at the quality of the product and they see nothing that they want to buy. Yes, there is a large audience for comic books out here. Unfortunately, when it comes down to today's publishers, they lack the vision or the direction to set towards reaching those customers. When it comes down to Marvel and DC Comics, they're still stuck in an archaic approach to creating comics, crafting comics, and publishing comics. They're still stuck trying to apply 1990s approaches in the 21st century, and because they're applying 1990s approaches to the craft of the art in comics, the story model in comics, and the approach to marketing comics, that is why the comic book industry has not grown in over 25 years. Because when it comes down to the comic book industry, people are still set in their ways, still trying to get a 1990s type surge with sales, and still looking to get those big numbers, not understanding that the entire publishing industry completely collapsed in 2008, and the approaches to publishing have changed. And instead of trying to adapt, we've seen Marvel and DC Comics continuing to apply the same approaches that did not work in the 1990s here in the 21st century. This is why their audience has declined, and this is why they had a collapse in 2009 and are about to have another collapse that may implode the industry back to the 1950s type levels, which were one of the most painful periods in the comic book industry. Because back in the 1950s, that's when we saw many independent publishers go out of business, and we saw many people lose their jobs. And sadly, we had to have that type of loss in order to get the growth that led to the Silver Age of DC and the Marvel Age of comics. Because once we cut away the dead weight from that era of people still trying to hold on to those 1930s and 1940s approaches, we then could change the market towards reaching people in the 1960s. And I see the same thing happening if there was a collapse in the 21st century. We see a lot of people starting to cut away the dead weight, and then we'd start to see people walking away from those old archaic approaches that did not work in the 1990s and need to be cut away. Moreover, we would be seeing both Warner Brothers and Disney finally realizing that they need to change their editors-in-chief, Dan Dido and Axel Alonso, because their approaches to business just don't work, and that their vision for the company is no vision at all. And in that, once people start seeing that this dead weight is being cut away, then they will start to say to themselves, it looks like the company is starting to change its direction, and it looks like you're getting some new leadership in place. And that's what a lot of people have been saying that they want to see, both at Marvel and DC, especially on the DC side, where many people have said they want to wait, they're waiting for the post-Dido era to begin, and they want to see that regime leave DC Comics before they go out here and start buying DC Comics again. Moreover, they want to see the return to the classic DC universe before they go out here and start buying comics. Now on the Marvel side, what they want to see is an end to this SJW agenda, and they want to see, again, a return to the classic Marvel that many people grew up with, and that's the Marvel they want to share with their kids. when it comes down to both DC and Marvel, they want to see an end to these eras, and they want to see a new group of leaders and to change things and to set a course towards writing comics and crafting comics in the 21st century. Because when it comes down to the comic book medium, the medium is a solid medium for telling stories. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, the craft has gotten lost due to the excesses of the 1990s and due to people still stuck in the 1990s believing that they can do whatever they want and do things without related to a standard or a house style. The quality of comic books have declined, and that's why the industry is in the slump it is in right now, because there is no set standard at the big two. There is no set direction at the big two. There is no business model at the big two. And there is no business strategy at the big two. When we compare the big two to their 1980s counterparts before the excesses of the 1990s, there was a house style. There was a model for every character. There was a standard for storytelling. There was a standard for marketing. There was a standard for business. And that all got lost due to the excesses of the 1990s. And in order for the industry to get better, it has to hit that rock bottom point where we can get back to standards, get back to publishing with a house style, get back to a set direction for the company, get back to a mission for the company, get back to a business plan that tries to target readers of all ages. Because when we look at the comic book industry right now, the median age is 40 years old. And when you have a 40-year-old customer as your median customer, you're in trouble, because that's what killed Oldsmobile. That's what killed Woolworths. That's what killed many companies, because once your customer gets past the age of 40, they become old and set in their ways, and there's no way for the product to go but down. And when I look at the comic book industry, rock bottom could be the best thing to happen to it, because, again, that's when we start to acknowledge the real problems, and then we start to set a real direction towards change. As it stands right now, it's the comic book industry. They keep trying to put band-aids on bullet wounds and not try to deal with the real problems that are causing the real serious issues. And I've gone over them in numerous videos, such as the distribution through Diamond, which has hampered the growth of the comic book industry, because when you have one distributor and they're selling only to comic book stores and bookstores, that hinders your growth, because you cannot distribute to places where people used to buy comics, like your supermarkets, like your grocery stores, like your candy stores, like your other specialty shops, because the big problem with comic books is the same problem that print-on-demand books struggle with, and that is that there is no returnability. And if you cannot return books, you cannot get retailers to have an incentive to stock your product. And that has really hindered the comic book industry over the last 20 years and hindered the growth. And a lot of people don't want to go back to returnability, because that, for several reasons. One is because they don't want to acknowledge that many books have poor sales, and because when a comic shop orders books, you can then put a number on it and say, oh, this book sold 200,000 copies, but then you don't have a number that tells you how many the retailer sold, like we had in the 80s. And the other thing that they don't want to do is because they don't want to change the content, because when it comes down to small business owners, they're going to demand a certain type of content in comics, and if they don't see it, they're not going to want to stock it. So those are the two reasons that the comic book industry doesn't want to do outside distribution. Now, when I look at that part, that's a big problem. And the other problem with the industry is that we have people who don't want to work towards their craft. We have a lot of people who are stuck in the 90s, early 2000s model, and the whole thing is that they don't want to change, and that's why the industry is stalling. I believe if a lot of the new people who are on the sidelines, like we've seen during the indie comics and the web comics, were to come in and really show them that the world has changed, we would see a completely different perspective on comics. And that would be good after the rock bottom, because with a lot of these indie writers and indie comic artists, they have a great perspective and a very balanced perspective of things, and they can really put a fresh take on many characters. I believe if they were given a shot at a monthly title or given a shot to have a run of stories in a comic. So there's a lot of people on the sidelines wanting to come in, but they can't come in because we have this people still stuck in a 90s model and still stuck in a 90s approach. And all those people are not going to leave unless there is a rock bottom. With a rock bottom, then you can you can acknowledge the problems that are affecting the industry, and you can bring in fresh new talent, fresh new voices, fresh new perspectives, and have that fresh vision that allows people to come out here and want to buy comics, because there is an audience. If all these people are buying superhero movies, they're out here looking for merchandise. And I've heard many sad stories over numerous videos, about people who said they would take their kids to the comic book store, they'd take their kids to the Barnes Noble, and they would go look for their favorite characters, and they could not find them, all due to these people who are in Marvel and DC and many other indies who want to continue to go on with approaches that have failed at marketing comics, writing comics, and they don't want to try to reach new audiences. The reason why you can't reach new readers is because everyone is still stuck in the 90s, and the only way to get out of the 90s, I believe, is with a rock bottom collapse, because it's only when you have a rock bottom that you can start building towards moving ahead. And I know everybody wants to avoid a rock bottom, but as I see it right now, rock bottom may be the best thing to ever happen to the comic book industry, because with rock bottom, that's when you are forced to change, and that's when you are forced to take responsibility for all the dysfunction going on in the industry. Because the people who want to see the industry survive, those are the people who are going to remain, and the dead weight, that's going to get cut away at the end of the day, because you can't grow on when you have dead weight, because all it's going to do is hold you down. And as I see it right now, all that dead weight has been at both Marvel and DC, that's drowning the comic book industry. And the only way to get rid of that dead weight is through a rock bottom, complete collapse, because that's when all these people who want to just be comfortable selling 15,000 issues can go away, and then we can start raising the bar to higher quality. Because the people who want to raise that bar, like myself, we want to come in and raise that bar back up to that 100,000, raise that standard up where people can easily recognize a character, raise that standard up so that the stories are relatable to readers of all ages, raise that standard up back to a level where it was in the early 1980s. I mean, mid to late 1980s and early 90s, before the gimmicks and the shock marketing. Raise that standard up to a level where people want to go out and buy comics, where people feel comfortable about buying comics, and where people care about the comics that are being sold. Right now, we don't have those people, and they're waiting on the sidelines for a better product. And I believe the only way for us to get to a better product is to go through that rock bottom period, purge away all the dead weight, and then bring in fresh new talent that has that passion and that heart towards creating great new product for the next generation of customers. If you'd like to try some of my titles, like those in the ISIS series or the SJS Direct Universe, you can click the link to the Amazon.com in the description box. It'll take you to all my titles. And if you want to help me continue to make more videos, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.